A strong woman knows when to forgive. My mother-in-law told me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Her words were meant to silence me, to make me accept my fate. And she was right. I am a strong woman. That's why I didn't just forgive them. I made sure there was nothing left to forgive. The crystal wine glass feels cold, almost sharp, against my fingertips. It's a perfect anchor in a room that's starting to feel like a dream, or rather, a nightmare dressed in cashmere and old money. Across the sprawling mahogany table, a 20-pound turkey glistens under the chandelier. A perfect centerpiece for a perfect family. My family, the Prescotts. My father-in-law, Arthur, taps his glass for attention. A self-satisfied smile playing on his lips as he prepares to deliver his annual Thanksgiving speech about family values and unbreakable bonds. Everyone smiles back, their faces masks of holiday cheer. They think this is a celebration of their power, a final confirmation that they've successfully tamed me, broken me into submission after 6 months of silent warfare. The air is thick with their victory, so thick I can barely breathe. If you've ever had to wear a mask at a family dinner, feeling completely alone in a room full of people who are supposed to love you, just type the name of the city you're watching from. Let's see how far this silent strength of ours really reaches. They have no idea. They see a broken woman, but all I see is a battlefield of my own choosing. This isn't their party. It's their execution. This isn't just one of those dramatic family revenge stories you hear about online. This became my reality. My purpose. My husband, Julian, avoids my gaze. His own face, a pale reflection of the guilt he carries. His mother, Margaret, watches me with a hawk's eyes, convinced she has won. Little do they know, every fake smile, every polite nod, has been part of a meticulous plan. To understand how we got here, to this moment of reckoning, you first need to understand the beautiful, perfect lie upon which my entire life was built. That beautiful, perfect lie. It was intoxicating. Before the Thanksgiving table became my courtroom, it was my stage. Our life in Austin was a carefully curated masterpiece. I wasn't just Julian Prescott's wife. I was Claire Anson, an architect whose name was being whispered in the most exclusive circles. I designed homes that defied gravity, structures of glass and steel that seemed to float over the Texas hills. Julian was the charming, golden boy heir to the Prescott real estate empire. We were that couple, the ones featured in magazines. The perfect blend of new talent and old money. The living embodiment of Austin's ambitious spirit. It's funny how a perfect picture can hide so much. Every family has its roles, doesn't it? The fixer, the golden child, the one who carries the weight. Let me know in the comments. Were you the one always expected to be perfect? The star. Or were you the one always cleaning up the messes? The savior. I'm genuinely curious to see the balance in our community here. Our home, a sprawling minimalist structure I designed myself overlooking Lake Travis, was my proudest achievement. Its floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a sky as wide and open as I believed our future to be. It was more than a house. It was a testament to our partnership, a promise cast in concrete and steel. And the most foolish part, I believed in it, with every fiber of my being. I poured my soul into that life, into him, into the Prescott name. I thought our foundation was unshakable, built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared dream. I never could have imagined it was all built on sand, ready to be washed away by a single, devastating secret delivered in the most sterile and impersonal way possible. That secret didn't arrive in a storm of shouting or a tearful, late-night confession. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, silent and clinical, delivered through the cold, impersonal glow of my computer screen. I was in my home office, the one with the panoramic view of the lake, sketching out a new blueprint. I remember the smell of fresh coffee and the clean, crisp lines of my work. It was a normal day, until it wasn't. The email had no subject line, no sender. I recognized just a single attachment. Curiosity, that fatal human flaw, made me click. It wasn't a virus. It was so much worse. It was a sonogram. For a moment, my heart leaped with a confused, disparate hope, but my eyes scanned the text at the top of the image. The sterile, black font that would forever be burned into my memory. Gestational age, 12 weeks. And then, the patient's name. Sophia Rossi. Not Claire Prescott. Sophia. The sound of my coffee mug shattering on the polished concrete floor was the only sound in the room for what felt like an eternity. The world didn't just tilt. It fractured into a million unrecognizable pieces. And the cruelest part, the detail that felt like a deliberate twist of a knife already lodged in my heart, was that Julian and I had been trying for a child for over a year. My life had become a calendar of ovulation tests, scheduled hopes, and quiet, monthly disappointments. All that time, while I was charting my temperature and praying, he had created life so effortlessly, so carelessly, with someone else. I didn't scream. I just sat there, in the ruins of my beautiful life, waiting for my husband to come home to explain the ghost of a child that would never be ours. He didn't have an explanation. Not a real one. When Julian finally walked through the door that evening, all he had were crumbling excuses and a pathetic stream of apologies that sounded rehearsed, hollow. He was a broken record of, "It was a mistake," and "You're the only one I love." But before I could even unleash the hurricane of rage building inside me, the real storm arrived. His parents, Arthur and Margaret Prescott, didn't knock. They entered with the chilling quiet of majority shareholders arriving to handle a PR crisis. They weren't there to comfort their grieving daughter-in-law. They were there to protect their brand. Arthur, with his steel-gray eyes and air of authority, spoke first. "Claire, let's be rational. A public scandal would be catastrophic for the Prescott name, for everything we've built, our lot." But it was Margaret's words that truly gutted me. She placed a cold hand on my arm, her voice a syrupy whisper. "Darling, are you sure you're not just being emotional? This is a lot to handle." Then came the final, crushing blow. "A strong woman knows when to forgive and preserve her family." The words hung in the air, dripping with poison. They weren't trying to help me, they were trying to manage me, to silence my legitimate pain. If you have ever been told your anger was an overreaction or your pain was too dramatic by the very people who caused it, do me a favor and hit that like button. It's a silent signal that you get it. That these stories of quiet invalidation need to be heard. I looked at the three of them, my weeping husband and his two ruthless handlers, and I finally understood. My marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a business merger. And I had just breached the contract by having an inconvenient human emotion. This wasn't a family crisis. This was a hostile takeover of my life. My first move in that hostile takeover was to fight back. I called a lawyer and spoke the one word that terrified the Prescotts more than any scandal: divorce. I was naive. I thought the truth was a weapon, that justice was a right, not a luxury you had to afford. The Prescott legal machine showed me how wrong I was. Julian, a puppet with his parents pulling the strings, refused to agree to an uncontested divorce. This was their first move, to drag me into a war of attrition they knew I couldn't win. Within 48 hours, a letter arrived from their top-tier law firm. It was a 10-page masterpiece of veiled threats, written on paper so thick it felt like armor. It didn't just reject my terms, it painted a narrative of me as an unstable, emotionally volatile woman. They threatened to contest my ability to manage our joint assets, suggesting my erratic behavior was a liability. They were building a case to not just leave me with nothing, but to publicly discredit and humiliate me. The house I had designed, my sanctuary, became my prison. The floor-to-ceiling windows that once offered freedom now felt like the bars of a gilded cage. They cut off my access to our main joint accounts, strangling me financially, leaving me with only my personal savings to fight a legal army. The official story, spun by Margaret at the country club, was that I was having a difficult time and needed my privacy. It was a polite way of isolating me, of cutting me off from any potential support. Every door was locked. Every path was blocked by a wall of their power and money. For a while, I let the silence and the isolation win. I was a ghost haunting the hallways of a life that was no longer mine. Utterly trapped. They had taken my present. And I could see no way to fight for a future. For weeks, I existed in that gray, suffocating fog of despair. I'd walk through the rooms of my own house like a ghost, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic beating of my own heart. They had done it. They had cornered me, isolated me, and I was beginning to believe there was no way out. The change didn't come with a flash of lightning. It was quieter. A slow burn that started late one night. I was in my office, staring at a blueprint for a client's beach house, a perfect coastal escape. I looked at the clean lines, the load-bearing walls, the foundation designed to withstand a hurricane. And then I saw my own reflection in the dark window overlooking the lake. I saw a hollowed-out woman, a ghost in her own design. And then came the thought, sharp and clear as a diamond. You are an architect, Claire. You don't cry when a foundation is rotten. You get a new blueprint. You tear the old structure down, and you build something stronger in its place. That was the moment everything shifted. I had been playing their game by their rules, using my pain as a shield against people who were bulletproof to human emotion. They didn't fear my tears. They feared a crack in their perfect public facade. They didn't care about my heart. They cared about their assets. So, I stopped trying to appeal to their non-existent humanity. The despair of the last few months didn't disappear. It calcified into something cold, hard, and useful. Purpose. I looked around my gilded cage, and for the first time, I didn't see prison bars. I saw a command center. They thought they had broken me, but they'd only stripped away my illusions, leaving the most dangerous version of myself. A woman with a brilliant mind, a broken heart, and a blueprint for revenge. Every blueprint begins with research. And my new project, which I privately codenamed Project Downfall, required me to become a forensic expert in the one thing the Prescotts truly worshipped: their own corruption. To the outside world, I played the part of the broken wife. I was quiet, compliant. I attended Margaret's sterile charity lunches and smiled wanly when people asked how I was doing. I even told Julian I was trying to find a way to move forward. A statement that was true, just not in the way he imagined. But every night, after the sprawling house fell silent, my office transformed from a prison into a war room. As an architect who had previously collaborated on several of their major developments, I still had access, a digital backdoor they'd never considered closing. Night after night, I was a ghost in the machine, digging through the digital bones of their empire. If you know what it feels like to be the quiet one in the room who is actually 10 steps ahead, just type the word architect in the comments. You don't have to explain. I'll know you get it. Fueled by black coffee and a fury that had cooled into pure, diamond hard focus. I spent hundreds of hours sifting through data. I cross-referenced invoices with building permits, followed money trails through shell corporations, and flagged zoning variances that had been approved just a little too easily. It wasn't one single explosive crime. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a systemic pattern of greed, inflating construction costs, using substandard materials while billing for premium, and paying exorbitant consulting fees to city officials through anonymous LLCs. They hadn't built an empire. They'd built a house of cards. I compiled every piece of evidence, every damning email and falsified invoice, onto a single, encrypted USB drive, a tiny piece of plastic that held the power to dismantle a dynasty. My weapon was forged. Now, all I needed was the perfect stage to use it. And then, as if delivered by the universe itself, the perfect stage was presented to me on a silver platter. The invitation didn't come from Julian. It came from Margaret. Of course. It wasn't a casual phone call. It was a thick, cream-colored card, engraved with the Prescott family crest, delivered by a courier. The annual Prescott Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't really an invitation. It was a summons, a command performance for their entire elite social circle. In her mind, my presence at that table would be the final, public seal on their victory. It would signal to their business partners, their investors, and their rivals that the unpleasantness from earlier in the year was officially over. That Claire, the temporarily rebellious daughter-in-law, had been successfully put back in her place. It was a masterful power play, designed to exhibit me as their beautiful, broken, and ultimately obedient trophy. She expected me to refuse, or perhaps to accept with a sullen resentment that she could gossip about later. She wanted a reaction. I gave her none. I called her back that same afternoon, my voice as smooth and sweet as honey. Margaret, how thoughtful. Of course. We'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I could almost hear the flicker of suspicion in her mind, quickly extinguished by her own towering arrogance. She couldn't conceive that a mouse would willingly walk back into the lion's den unless it had been thoroughly declawed. The final days leading up to the dinner were the calmest I had been in months, as Julian and I drove up the long, winding driveway to the Prescott estate, its windows blazing with warm, inviting light. He turned to me, his face etched with worry. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" he asked. I smiled, a real, terrifying smile he hadn't seen in a long time. "I've never been better." He mistook my calm for forgiveness. It was, in fact, the deep, still water, calm before the tsunami hits. The tsunami didn't announce its arrival. It waited patiently through the clinking of silverware and the drone of polite, meaningless conversation. I watched them all perform their roles, blissfully unaware of the tectonic plates shifting right under their feet. Then, just as I knew he would, Arthur stood, his crystal glass raised high. He looked every bit the patriarch, the king surveying his domain. "To family," he began, his voice booming with a sincerity he could never truly possess. "Our greatest asset, a foundation of loyalty, trust, and tradition that has made the Prescott name what it is today." He had the audacity to lock eyes with me when he said the word loyalty. A final, condescending jab. The room dutifully applauded and drank to the beautiful lie. And as their applause faded, a new sound took its place, the soft, deliberate scrape of my chair on the marble floor. I stood up. A sudden, sharp silence fell over the table. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me. I saw Margaret's eyes narrow into a warning glare. I saw Julian's face drain of all color. Every eye in that room was on me. In that single moment, all their power, all their money, meant nothing. The narrative was finally mine. If you have ever dreamed of having that one moment, that one chance to stand up and speak your undeniable truth to the people who tried to silence you, hit that subscribe button right now. This is a space for those who know that sometimes your voice is the only weapon you need. I smiled sweetly at my father-in-law. That was a beautiful toast, Arthur. I couldn't agree more. Family is everything. I let that hang in the air for a beat before I raised my own glass. In fact, I'd like to propose a toast of my own. A toast to transparency. My hand was perfectly steady as I turned my gaze to my husband. To Julian, I said, my voice clear and cold. And to his other family, the one he started with Sophia Rossi. The silence that followed my toast was a physical thing. It was a vacuum, sucking the very air and warmth out of the room. I heard a fork clatter against a porcelain plate. I saw Margaret's hand fly to her chest, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Julian looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of pure, abject panic. Before anyone could find their voice, before Arthur could unleash his thunder, I continued, my own voice unnervingly calm. "It seems I've forgotten my manners," I said, slowly walking to the head of the table. I pulled out my phone, the screen already lit. "Allow me to introduce you all to the project Julian has been working on so diligently." I held up the screen, displaying the crisp, black and white image of the sonogram. "This is their first blueprint." And from mine, a wave of shocked whispers and horrified murmurs swept through the guests. This was the juicy, personal scandal they would dine out on for weeks. But I wasn't finished. As Arthur started to rise from his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple, his voice a low growl of, "That's enough, Claire," I cut him off. "Oh, I'm not talking about just this anymore, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping the sweet pretense and hardening into steel. "This infidelity, It's just a symptom. The real disease is the culture of lies this family is built upon. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small, black USB drive. I placed it on the pristine white tablecloth with a soft but definite click that echoed in the silent room. Speaking of which, I'd love to get your opinion on the budget for the Skyline Tower. Specifically, the $1.5 million in consulting fees paid to a shell corporation that, as far as I can tell, doesn't exist. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The gossip died, replaced by cold, professional fear. I wasn't just airing dirty laundry anymore. I was threatening to burn the entire house down. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I left them in the wreckage of their perfect Thanksgiving dinner and walked down the hall to Arthur's study, the inner sanctum, the dark-wooded throne room where all the Prescott family's real decisions were made. And I waited. They stumbled in a few minutes later. A trinity of ruin. Arthur was flushed with a rage that made his veins stand out. Margaret was whispering, "How could you do this to us?" over and over like a broken mantra. And Julian just stared at the floor. A hollowed-out man. I let them sputter and accuse for a moment, letting the storm of their emotions break against the wall of my calm. Then, I held up a hand. "Save it," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "The time for emotion is over. This is a business transaction now." Oh. I walked over to his enormous mahogany desk and placed 2 thick manila envelopes on its polished surface. They landed with a soft, heavy thud. "Envelope number 1. I said, tapping the first one. "Contains divorce papers. They are uncontested. They grant me sole ownership of this house, my design, my intellectual property, and they stipulate a wire transfer of $5 million into my personal account by noon tomorrow. Consider it a severance package for services rendered to the Prescott brand. You sign it, and I disappear from your lives and your headlines forever." Arthur sneered. "And if we don't?" I tapped the second envelope. Envelope number 2 is a copy of everything on that USB drive. A detailed, annotated guide to 30 years of your family's creative accounting. If the terms in the first envelope are not met, a courier delivers this one to the IRS and the Austin Business Chronicle. There is no third option. There is no negotiation. You get to choose which secret costs you more. And with that, I turned, walked out of the study, and didn't look back. Checkmate. The wire transfer confirmation arrived in my email at 10:47 a.m. the next morning. The signed divorce papers arrived by courier an hour later. Of course they did. In the end, they did what they always did. They took the business decision, cutting their losses and choosing the quiet, private amputation over a spectacular public death. I never stepped foot in that house again. I sold it and everything in it, purging the last ghosts of a life that was never truly mine. With the dust of Texas in my rearview mirror, I drove west, toward the ocean, until the air tasted of salt and second chances. Today, I live in San Diego. I run my own firm, Anson Designs. No partners, no investors. Just my name on the door. We specialize in sustainable architecture, building homes on foundations of honesty, designed to work with the environment, not against it. My life isn't as glamorous. There are no galas, no magazine spreads. But my peace is real. My success is my own. And this brings me to the final lesson, the blueprint I wanted to share from this whole ordeal. First, always assess the true foundation. When a crack appears in your life, don't just patch it. Find the courage to see what's really holding it all up. Is it love? Or is it a lie? Second, your greatest skill is your most powerful weapon. They saw me as an emotional wife. They forgot I was a meticulous architect. Use the part of you they always underestimated. And that leads to the final point. You are the architect of your own life. You have the power to tear down what is broken and build something magnificent in its place. The world may never know the full story of the battles you've won in silence, but we do. Subscribe if these stories speak your truth. And let's continue to build a space where strength is celebrated and new foundations are laid. Thank you for listening. Now, go design your future.